two athletes run the exact same sprint time, same number to the 100th. One of them is an injury waiting to happen and the other's just fine, but the test won't tell you which is which. By the time you're watching this, the NFL Combine is already over, but as I was coming up with this idea, there were 319 prospects that were in Indianapolis, and almost all of them ran the 40-yard dash. And by the time the results dropped, the internet had already ranked them by their time to the 100th of a second. So 2 years ago, Xavier Worthy ran a 4.21, which was the fastest in Combine history. This year, we have Brennan Thompson from Mississippi State, who's expected to challenge that number. Maybe he did, maybe someone else came out of nowhere. But here's what I can tell you, regardless of what happened. Every time a name hits the top of the 40 list, the same conversation happens. Whether it's in football, soccer, basketball, handball, every field and court sport that values speed. Coaches see the number and think they know something about the athlete. Here's the problem. A single sprint time, whether it's a 40-yard dash or a 30-meter sprint, doesn't tell you what you think it tells you. See, I profiled athletes across 14 countries over multiple sports over the last 15 years, and the most common mistake I see from amateur academies to professional organizations is treating a test result as a profile. It's not. It's one data point, and if it's the only data point, it is very misleading. So today I'm gonna break down why most speed testing gives you a number but misses the athlete, what's actually happening underneath that number, and most importantly, what you can do differently starting tomorrow. So whether you're a head of performance, a strength coach, or a self-employed practitioner, let's get into it. So back to our 40-yard dash. Let's say two athletes run the exact same time, a 4.45, identical result. But one of those athletes reaches top speed by the 20-yard mark and holds it. The other is still accelerating at 30 yards and essentially runs out of distance. So they have the same time, but completely different movement profiles, completely different training needs, and completely different injury risk profiles. This is the mistake, treating the outcome as the explanation. And you see this across sports. In basketball, a guard who gets to top speed in 3 steps has a fundamentally different acceleration signature than one who needs 5. In handball, for example, the difference between a wing player's first step quickness and a backcourt player's build-up speed changes everything about how you train them. But if you only test the outcome, i.e. the final time, you miss the mechanism entirely. So here we have research from Ken Clark that found that maximum velocity was very strongly correlated with the 40-yard dash performance, so R of 0.94. But the acceleration phase showed different correlations depending on the athlete's profile, meaning the same finish time can mask very different acceleration and top speed capabilities. Most testing batteries in sports, across all sports, give you a number, but they don't give you the shape of how that number was produced. And if you train based on the number alone, you're really just kind of guessing. Every athlete sits somewhere on a force velocity spectrum. So some produce high force at low velocity, which means they're very powerful at the beginning. They're dominant in the first 5 to 10 meters. But then you have others that produce moderate force at high velocity, which means they need a little bit of distance to build, but their top end is exceptional. Neither one of these is better than the other. They're just different, and they require different training stimuli. So when you test an athlete with just a time, you're collapsing that entire spectrum into one single number. And the mechanism behind the result matters more than the result itself. Here's a practical example. Here's some research published on elite male 100-meter sprint performance, which found that the role of maximum velocity versus relative acceleration varied significantly between athletes, even at the elite level. So athletes with similar race times showed fundamentally different acceleration to max velocity profiles. And the study concluded that profiling should examine the phases independently and not just the outcome. And this translates directly to our field and court sports. Back to American football, a wide receiver that dominates in the first 10 yards but fades after 20 might need a different stimulus than the one who builds throughout the entire route. So if your testing doesn't capture the shape of the sprint and not just the time, you're profiling the test and not the athlete. So what does this mean for us in practice? Well, 3 things. First, split times change the picture. If you're running a 40-yard dash, a 30-meter sprint, or any linear speed test, capture splits. At minimum, 5 meters, 10 meters, and 20 meters. The overall time will tell you the outcome, but the splits will tell you the story. And I already know a lot of people out there are saying, well, I don't have the money for the technology, but let me tell you, technology usually isn't a barrier because timing gates are very accessible. And even smartphone-based apps with video analysis can give you very reasonable split estimates. A lot of times the barrier is the decision to look beyond the final number. So an athlete produces high relative force in the first 5 meters, but plateaus early, might not need more acceleration work. They might need exposure to higher velocities. The opposite athlete, who's slow at the start but strong at top end, needs stimulus and force dominant ranges. If you train both athletes the same way just because they ran the same time, you're wasting one of them. And this applies in any sport, regardless of whether you're working with a full team or just a single client. And here's what you can do differently. So if you're a coach, a head of performance, or a self-employed practitioner working across any field or court sport, here's what changes immediately. Step 1, stop reporting single times. So if your testing battery produces just one number per test, add splits. Even 2 splits can change the picture. So 5 meter and 20 meter splits on a 30 meter sprint will separate acceleration dominant from velocity dominant. And that separation is where training specificity starts. Step 2, compare the shape and not just the score. So whenever you retest, and you will retest, don't just ask, did the time improve? Ask, did the profile change? So an athlete who improves their 30 meter time by dropping their 0 to 10 split, but keeping the same 20 to 30 split, has a different adaptation than the one who improved at top end. Both of them improved, but the training implications are just different. Step 3, you have to connect the profile to the program. This is a step that a lot of setups skip. The test happens, the data gets filed, but the program stays the same for everyone. Value of profiling is only realized when it changes a decision, specifically a training decision for a specific athlete. You don't need expensive technology to do this. You just need a system that connects what the test reveals to what the session prescribes. And finally, step 4, and if you're self-employed and only take one thing away from this video, then please let it be this, because this is your edge. Bigger teams and organizations usually have the money for technology, but what comes with that is bureaucracy, which means a lot of times they lack the agility to act on what the data shows. However, if you're an independent practitioner, so self-employed as a speed coach, an S&C consultant, or a private performance coach, your advantage is the ability to individualize without that bureaucracy. You have freedom. So if you profile your athletes properly, if you connect the profile to the program, if you track the response, that's a system. And that system is exactly what your clients will pay to keep. So here's the takeaway. A sprint time is an outcome. It's not a profile. So whether you're watching the NFL Combine this past weekend, whether you're testing your basketball team on Monday or assessing a new client in your facility, look past the number, look at the shape. So 2 athletes can run the same time and need completely different programs. If your testing doesn't capture that difference, your training can't address it. And if your training can't address it, your availability numbers will eventually reflect the gap. And if you want to see how this works in a professional system, how profiling connects to programming, how programming connects to availability, and how availability becomes a measurable output, then let's talk. You can book an insight call and we can talk about your system and find ways to optimize it. The link is in the description. And if this video was helpful, then please subscribe. Every week, I'll break down one idea from speed, availability, and performance systems across different sports. No tips, not tricks really, just principles that transfer. See you next week.